Greetings, this is Management 431. We're now diving into Chapter 9, Assessing External Candidates for the staffing class. What we're getting at now, we've moved beyond how to source people, how to actively recruit them, make sure we give them good recruiting messages, that we treat them fairly in the process. Now we're getting into differentiating among the candidates to decide which candidate is going to be the best person for the job. Now remember, our goal, believe it or not, is to discriminate. We need to discriminate between good candidates and poor candidates. Discriminating in and of itself isn't the problem. What is the problem is when we use non-job related criteria to discriminate amongst our candidates. So hence that's how the terminology is actually used. We want to make sure that we are using job-related criteria to assess our candidates and differentiate between poor and strong candidates. And so what we're going to get into with this next chapter is the ways that we assess external candidates, because it's going to be very different than what we do for internal candidates. The learning objectives for this chapter are to first identify all the different kinds of goals that we want to set when we do external assessment. There's all sorts of different ways goals that we want to accomplish, whether it's a certain quality of candidates or a certain amount of diversity or certain types of KSAs, whatever they are. But we want to go over the different kinds of goals that we want to set. Then we want to describe what we mean by an assessment plan in and of itself, so be able to understand when we say we're going to set up an assessment plan as part of our staffing process. What does that mean? Which tools are we going to use? Why are we going to use some tools and not others? Remember, go back to the things that we learned in the measurement lecture where we talked about reliability and validity and the importance of having using scale scores that are really reliable and valid, making sure that we are predicting job performance, and we're predicting job performance in the pool of candidates where that selection tool has been validated, right? You don't use a selection tool for office workers with people who work with their hands, because there's two different skill sets, right? We want to be able to understand the different assessment methods and why we would use them, what is the best way to use them when we're doing assessment. We want to be able to look at different ways to evaluate the external assessment methods, reliability, validity, affirmative action issues, etc., etc. And lastly, we want to be able to figure out how to reduce adverse impact when we're setting up an assessment process and an assessment method. Companies can set up a wide variety of external assessment goals, and this is a good list. Almost exhaustive, but pretty good. It's not completely exhaustive. But these are some common external assessment goals. Number one, we want to maximize fit. And so we want to make sure that we have the best person that can do the job and the best person who can also fit in the company. And we have to decide what we err on more so. Is it more important for us to have someone that fits the job well? Particularly if it's a job that requires really rare skills, then person-job match may be more important. But if it's a job that can be trained, and think about Churns. Churns has a bunch of salespeople to work in their clothing departments, but the thing is about Churns is they have really good training because they have a way that they want people to sell. They have the Churns way of how they want them to sell clothes and the kind of personal interaction they want them to have with customers in the store. So you want to hire people who are going to fit into your culture. You can train them to do sales later on. So consider it that way. Maximize fit isn't always about person-job. It can be about person-organization fit. Will they fit into the company? Will they fit with the company culture? Will we be happy working for this company? And am I willing to be trained on the skills that I need to do the job as long as I know I'm going to fit in with the culture? So fit isn't just about person-job match, all right? We can also make sure we have to do accurate assessment. If we've had problems in the past with not being good at identifying good candidates, that may be our goal in bringing in new assessment tools to make sure that we have a more accurate assessment of people. The best way to get more accurate assessment is making sure that we have valid tools and that are appropriate for the job that we are hiring for. So that is always a goal. Maximize our return on investment, always an important goal. We want to make sure that we can have candidates who are going to be good performers and who will also make good money for us. We want to make sure we generate positive stakeholder reactions. So if we're very customer focused, we want to make sure that our hires are going to have a good relationship with our customers. We also want to make sure that the people that they interact with on the job are going to like them and they're going to respect them. So we want to make sure we've got good stakeholder reactions. We want to make sure that we have a talent philosophy and HR strategy that is being met. And so when we take the time to set up what our talent philosophy and HR strategy is, that requires us then to make sure that our assessment goals are making sure that we meet that talent philosophy and HR strategy. We want to make sure that we are establishing and reinforcing our employer image. And if your employer image is something that's incredibly important to you, as it should be, but for some companies it's more important than others, we want to make sure that we are hiring people that we know will reinforce the image that we want to project. We want to make sure that we are doing a good job of developing our new employees when they come on board. Everybody comes in with a skill set. Some people need more skills to do their job today, but we also want to be thinking about a development plan. Where do we see these people working in the next few years, and how can we get them there? We want to make sure that we are being ethical in our assessment process and in our screening process. Be careful of things like nepotism or the similar to me biases that can creep into things. Making sure that we maintain good ethical standards is important. Ensuring legal compliance, making sure that we are compliant with the law, affirmative action if we are required to do so, but certainly EEO laws are essential for us. I love the way the textbook authors think about complementary and supplementary fit, and they look at different types of fit. There's person-job fit, which you've heard me talk about a few times. You know, does the person fit the job? All right, so are they intelligent? Do they have the right KSAs? Will they be able to do the job if they were to get the job? And we have person-group fit. Now, if you're working in a group environment, it's important that you have somebody not just who can do the job, but who can also fit in with the people in the group and can move into the group process and contribute to the group flow. And so we want to look at someone who can work well in a team, someone who has good conflict management styles, that is compatible with people on the team, that is really good at communication, is adaptable, willing to work with others, has expertise that will either complement, support the team, or is different than the team, so it actually adds a competitive advantage. And the goal here is that we want to make sure that there's going to be there aren't going to have massive personality conflicts. We don't want people to be the same, but they need to be complementary. They need to be able to work together, and they need to have some larger competencies to be able to do a good job working in the organization. The other aspect of fit that we've talked about already, you've heard me talk about already, is person-organization fit, where it's the fit between values and beliefs and the personality and the values and norms and the culture. So the personality of the individual and the culture of the company, was there a good fit there? So values, goals, what are my motivations? Does it match your purpose? Will I fit in with everybody? And whether or not that will feel good. Lastly, we have person-vocation fit. Oftentimes people come into a job and then they might want to move to a different department to do something different. And you might say, great idea. You know, you may seem enthusiastic about doing a particular job, but it might be that they don't have the right vocational fit. You know, for example, if somebody wants to do marketing, but they don't really have a good ear for marketing, or somebody wants to do credit, but they don't have a good ear for numbers. Somebody wants to, you know, do good in HR and they want to move into the HR department, but they don't know how to do basic statistics to be able to, you know, manage affirmative action and EEO law calculations. And so these are things that you've got to be aware of. People believe that they will do well in a particular vocation, but oftentimes people get into the job of their dreams and it no longer is the job of their dreams. They just don't match that vocation. So it is important, as you're helping people to develop, to grow in the company, that you're assessing their aptitudes, their interests, their long-term goals, and aligning that with the organization's long-term goals to see whether or not they will fit that particular vocation. So our previous slide talked about the different kinds of fit: person job, person group, person organization, person vocation. And now we're going to talk about how it's differentiated based on complementary versus supplementary fit. Complementary fit is when the person that you're bringing into the company complements or has something different than other people in the organization or the group, and so they add something to the mix. And that's fine. Sometimes it's exactly what you want. Sometimes what you're looking for is supplementary fit, where someone is similar in the skill set because you want people to rotate, job responsibilities, for example, in a self-managed team, where everybody has the ability to rotate positions so they don't get bored. And so supplementary fit might be good, that everybody has similar skills so that they can all be plugged in to do work at a particular time, depending on what the needs of the company are. This slide looks at assessment outcomes, and what does that mean? It means we provide a person with the test, and then we determine whether or not how they did on the assessment and whether or not that means that they would be hired. And so the x-axis is a good performer or poor performer on the job, and then hired or not hired means whether or not they passed the tests and they met the cutoff to be hired. Our goal is we want people who we hired who are good performers, which gives us a true positive, which is in the upper right hand corner, and that we want people who were poor performers who were not hired, that would have been poor performers, which is the true negatives in the lower left-hand corner. Oftentimes, we really can't tell whether or not someone would have been a poor performer. We can only anticipate that might have been. One of the only ways that we can assess whether or not an assessment tool actually allows for true negatives and true positives is by using predictive validity assessment. Using a criterion-related validity method, we're not looking at concurrent validity, but predictive validity. And predictive validity, remember, is we give the test to everybody as they walk in the organization. We don't use that for hiring purposes. And then 2 years or 3 years in the future, we would assess whether or not we would compare their performance on that new assessment test with whether or not they're a good performer in the organization or whether they were hired in the first place. And the goal is that we want to see alignment so that we can not only predict true positives, but we can also predict true negatives. We want to be careful of not having false negatives or false positives. False positives means we end up hiring people who ended up being poor performers. We don't want to do that. Sometimes we may err on that side, and I would much rather err on the side oftentimes of hiring somebody that I think might be iffy rather than missing somebody who might be really good. So the false negatives are things that we want to avoid. So anything we can do to avoid a false negative is really important. We want to make sure that we're not losing somebody who actually would have been a really good candidate for the job. Sometimes, in terms of avoiding false negatives, we may end up with a few false positives, people that probably we shouldn't have hired and we did. But again, this is the goal, right? We want people in the lower left-hand corner and the upper right-hand corner, true positives and true negatives. And that is where we'd like to see things map out over time. One of the good ways that we can assess if an assessment tool has actually been useful is calculating return on investment. And basically, we are looking at what we would call the economic value of improved performance, which is, what did we get, in terms of improved performance by paying money for a particular hire. And we want to make sure we save by avoiding bad hires. And essentially, we want to look at the economic value of improved performance and the savings from avoiding bad hires. So this is a common formula that many companies use. You have the number of people that you hire, the average number of years that they stay in a position. It's the correlation between the assessment method and the level of performance, the dollar value of the improved job performance over using a new assessment method, the number of job candidates assessed, the cost per assessment, the selection ratio for that tool, the percentage of bad hires avoided, and the average cost of bad hires, the dollar return on your assessment value method. And what we're doing here, this is like a utility analysis basically. We want to know whether or not it makes sense to change to a different selection tool. Will it get us more return on our investment? If we spend a little bit more money on a particular assessment tool, will we get better performers and a higher return on our investment? And again, it's a complex system, and it's a complex process to assess, and it's really important that we recognize all those variables that go into it and be able to find as an objective way to assess all of that data, because that's the kind of thing that we need to be able to make a case why it may cost us $1,000 more or a few $1,000s more to hire somebody, but in the end we get a better candidate over the long run. The goal of return on investment as a key metric is to help us to identify how to avoid bad hires, because bad hires reflect the fact that this is going to cost us more money. And so we want to make sure we save as much money by making sure we make good hires and not think about what it would cost us for making bad hires. Return on investment from a new assessment method is the sum of the economic value of improved performance and the savings from avoiding bad hires. So again, if we avoid a bad hire, how much have we saved by making sure that we didn't have people who are going to drain the company and would have low productivity? Even though staffing should be seen as an investment rather than a cost, we still need to be really cost sensitive. And it is still important for companies. And imagine, again, if you're in a company where the HR department works underneath the CFO or the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, they're going to be much more metric focused and much more ROI focused. So cost is going to be much more important. Even though from an accounting purpose, we treat HR issues as costs, not investments. From a mental, emotional, cultural perspective, we do need to think about HR as a investment, because if we don't think about it as an investment and treat it like an ROI, like we would treat any other kind of investment, we need to use the metrics and the language of investment in order for people to understand what it is that we're talking about. The goal of using a formula like that is it helps to provide a way to estimate the return on investment of any new assessment method. So what we're looking at is the assessment method and the costs and the benefits from that assessment method that we used to use versus a new one, and we'll to see whether or not it's worthwhile for us to utilize the new tool, what the utility of that new tool needs to make sure that it gives us a value added. Many times when we give assessment tools to new hires, that assessment tool gives us information on where there may be a gap in this knowledge, skills, and abilities that a certain individual may have. We may be okay bringing in somebody who doesn't have a particular skill set or a particular ability because we know that skill or ability is trainable, or they can go to school and they can learn the knowledge, and what it takes to be able to do a job. But we have to recognize that some of the assessment tools we use can actually give us that advantage of allowing us to see where those gaps are, and that informs the training and development function, what new skills and abilities our new hires need to have developed. So when they come in, we have a customized training program for them so they can get up to speed to be able to do their job. So we want to be able to develop them over the long haul, but also help them in the short term to make sure they have the skills to do their jobs. And so other things that we can consider in using an assessment is figuring out what's their preferred learning time and learning style, because if we know that people are more oral or prefer audible learning, or they're more read-write, we can customize a training program that may help them to learn better. Obviously, people learn best when a learning is reinforced across all different kinds of learning styles, but fundamentally, if we can figure out what people's learning styles are, we can help custom a good training for them so that it'll improve their effectiveness, and then ultimately, we hope it improves retention. In terms of legal compliance issues when it comes to assessment, the Uniform Guidelines and Employee Selection Procedures says that a test of knowledge and abilities must measure a representative sample of knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to perform the job. So a knowledge must be defined in terms of behavior. So we can say you have to have this knowledge, but it has to be tested as a form of behavior one way or the other. Each knowledge must be part of a body of learned information that is used in and is necessary for required and observable job behaviors. Sorry, reading this and it didn't make sense for me for a second there. It is necessary for required and observable job behaviors, and what that means is if it is an essential function of the job, that I have to be able to see someone doing this. So a knowledge assessment should assess a behavior that we know is directly related to someone's knowledge. So we're going to be assessing their observable behaviors that are absolutely essential for the job. And we know that that behavior is representative of the knowledge they have and how to do something. Abilities are defined in terms of observable aspects of job behavior. So I have a knowledge, and then my abilities represent that knowledge oftentimes. Each ability should be necessary for the performance of important work behaviors, and any selection procedure measuring an ability should closely approximate an observable work behavior. And so again, if you're measuring an ability, we don't want to be measuring obscure abilities. We want to measure an ability that we know someone has to demonstrate on the job. And the closer that we can get to that, the more fair the system feels. Again, as it says here at the bottom, to the extent that the setting and the manner of the administration of the selection test fail to resemble the work situation, then it is less likely that it's going to be considered valid. So you want to make sure if you're administrating some sort of ability test or knowledge test that it has to emulate what people would actually do on the job. It has to have pretty high fidelity in terms of representing what people will do every day on their job. So with respect to external candidates, we have different stages and different names for people at different stages of the process. When a person first applies for the job, they're considered an applicant because we don't know whether or not they're even a viable candidate for the job. So we consider them an applicant simply because they applied, they have the minimum acceptable criteria, education skills, et cetera, that we expect for the job. As they get through the initial screening, and we have a subset of people that we believe would be a good match for the job, but we're going to do further assessments, we call them candidates. And those candidates are the ones, the broad range of people that we typically put through a wide variety of assessment tests, usually for ability tests or integrity tests or personality tests, those sorts of things. And we give them all sorts of evaluative assessments. The low-performing candidates are screened out as quickly as possible. The high-performing candidates stay in. And of course, it all depends on the tool that we use for our decision making, whether or not we use a multiple hurdle approach or other types of approaches. So we want to make sure we'll deal with that in future chapters. But for now, just recognize that our lower performing assessment candidates will probably be screened out of the second stage of the hiring process. Our final candidates, the finalists, are usually the ones that are usually 2 or 3 that we think are the best, and that we would probably choose from among them, that small subset, as the best candidates for the job. And ideally, you would have a 1, 2, 3. Somebody, if that first person doesn't take the job, you would take the second or you'd take the third. You'd like to have a list of finalists that you would find are all minimally acceptable, more than minimally acceptable to be able to do the job. And so your finalist is the ones that are left after all the screening has been done, all the assessments have been done, and you've moved out the people who you believe are not going to be good performers. And that's your subset of people that you're going to choose from.